Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and we are back with probably more of a discussion on this one, probably more so than a review. As you can see from the very nice background, I've got it down now. Empire Strikes Back. We do already have a review on this film that we did many years ago now, as we did with all the Star Wars films. So we don't really want to make this so much of a review because there's a video out there that you can go and see. But this was quite a special screening, and not to mention as well, this was our first trip back to the cinema. So select theatres are open in the UK now, so it was really nice to go back. Me and you met up yesterday. Me and you just met up to see Empire Strikes Back, but I was there all day. I actually got 3 films in yesterday, which was mad. We returned to our second home of the cinema. And first trip back to the cinema since March, which is quite well, I mean, the year's just gone pretty much, hasn't it, really, at this point? But
yeah, it was weird because I think I remember I think the day before they declared lockdown in March, I went to the cinema to watch 1917 again because I kind of jokingly said that I don't want the last film at the cinema to be me watching the Harrison Ford dog film. it was okay, but I don't want that to be my lingering. Maybe that was the final ever film I saw at the cinema. So it was nice to get them open, and I was a bit hesitant. Obviously, there is a pandemic going on. Cinema's not a priority for the world. We all get that. We're not advocating to leave the house and go to the cinema unless you need to. I thought I'd add that in quickly, but oh my word, it was nice to be back. You know, especially to a cinema I don't go to often. We obviously won't disclose the name of it, but it was obviously for those in America. I know you've got drive-ins. A couple of them have come over here in England. The way they're gearing up was that all the cinemas were wanting to open on the 10th of July to show Inception on the 17th and Tenet on the 31st. Obviously, that didn't happen. Tenet got delayed to August the 12th, and obviously Inception to the 31st. So they have this weird split where half of our chains in the UK hadn't put any tickets on sale, so just said, okay, we're not going to open until July 31st now. And the other 2 big chains put, okay, we've already put all our tickets on sale, so we're just going to continue to show old films, which is really cool. So I believe you got to watch Back to the Future 1, Pulp Fiction, and Empire. I'm not going to lie, I'm only envious of one of those, which was Pulp Fiction.
It was really good on the big screen as well. But this is not a Pulp Fiction review, but full marks for that on the big screen. I always love going to see older films at the big screen anyway, because even with this one as well, and we'll get into it when we start talking about it in a minute, even me and you, a film, Empire Strikes Back, that we've seen countless times, we were noticing new lines of dialogue that we hadn't really focused on before, or when you've got it blown up onto that big screen, you take in so much more of it, you appreciate it a lot more. So in terms of like a cinema environment for this film, for me, like I did go to, so they've been doing a Star Wars in concert series at the Royal Albert Hall towards the winter years, every single year so far. And it's meant to be Return of the Jedi this year. Whether that's going to happen yet, I don't know. I'm hoping it is. But last year I got to see Empire Strikes Back. That was around October time, I think. So I think that was probably the last time that I watched the movie. And that was obviously on a big screen. You've got the orchestra in front of you, but this felt different because it was truly that cinema experience, you know, with all the lights down and, you know, the chairs, the rows and everything. And I always try and take my mind back to what it would have been like to see this film in this setting when it first came out. So going all the way back to 1980, this film would have just, well, and it did, blown people's minds. And it still looks as great today. I know it's the up-to-date version. It's I believe it's the Blu-ray special edition, isn't it? This wasn't 4K or anything like that.
Yeah, so they advertised it as it was going to be the 4K re-release that's obviously just come out on Blu-ray. It's on Disney Plus and stuff like that. And then it came on the news about a week ago that Disney pulled the plug with the exhibitors, that they couldn't get an agreement between the exhibitors who wanted the 4K, and I'm guessing the percentage Disney wanted of probably sending out a 4K cut, which is, I mean, I know it's all done digitally and whatnot, and sending, it's not film, is it? It's digital. I'm guessing it probably came down to sending the file size of probably the astronomical amount that 4K is to cinemas to show. So obviously it's politics we won't learn more about, but I really couldn't care less right now. Obviously, I'm fortunate got the 4K box set behind me. Sorry, I don't know how this pointing thing works in StreamYard. So I did watch it about, I want to say about 2, when the Blu-rays came out, I saw it probably about 2 months ago, maybe. And it was really good to see it on 4K. It didn't look as great on the prequels. Obviously, they're shot on digital, not shot on film. That was the really big thing to me, testing surround sound, testing your visuals comes down to a film that you know more than anything. For me, the go-to is a Star Wars. And when I watched that at home, it was like, okay, now I'm really noticing how powerful this new tech is. Whereas like cinema's not showing 4K, I don't care. I want to watch The Empire Strikes Back at the cinema. I want a giant screen. I want audio, good sound, everything you'd expect. It wasn't IMAX, but it was the next thing, which is like showcase his own iteration of IMAX. I think we can say it's X Plus they call it. And obviously you're not going to get you're not going to get Star Wars on IMAX. They show them on IMAX, but they don't shoot in IMAX. It's not that important. So it was a nice experience to sit down and watch it. And the fun thing is, I'm really strict at cinema. I don't speak to people. I get arsey when they do. And me and he just sat there, not taking the piss. I don't think we were disturbing anyone around us. If we were, it wasn't intentional. But we had a really fun time. And I think because it's a film you've seen so many times, it just made it nicer to have someone you can kind of like laugh with. I mean, I still like my sister and a friend and stuff, but they didn't get that level. Obviously, we'll get to the new bits of dialogue, but there was one line in particular which has completely blown my mind that I'd never heard before in this film. So it was, you know what, to first film back, why not Star Wars? You know, it's a shame they're not doing 4 and 6 because it felt really weird.
I was just going to say, I wanted to bring up the OCD thing with us because it's a thing. We've acknowledged it. We've talked about it. And I think we've probably discovered more about it in the last month together because we, you know, how our DVDs stack and everything like that. The OCD runs deep, but it does feel weird just going to see Empire. It's always one of those things. If you ever put Return of the Jedi on, you have to complete that trilogy. You don't necessarily have to do the whole saga, but just keep it contained to that one trilogy. But I'm pretty much guarantee at some point we'll get a 4K cut of, well, I hope we do, at the cinema of all the original trilogy. And we'll be there again for this one, for the 4K cut. I'm absolutely sure we will be. But yeah, so, I mean, I think this was the first time, I mean, watching the original trilogies together, I think. I know we went to see that one, but Empire was definitely, this was the first time that me and you have watched this movie together, I think.
Yeah, so we did, obviously we've done our prequel watch-alongs. We did Rogue One at the cinema, Last Jedi at the cinema. We did episode 4 at the Albert Hall. You couldn't really talk during that. That was me, you, and Tate. That was a nice night out. But this was the first like sit-down fun episode. Because we'll talk about episode 5, and you've already said at the beginning of the video, this isn't a review. We've done a review. There's nothing we can add to that discussion. But we're looking at doing something different because it also is the 40th anniversary. Not to the day. It was in the end of May. I reckon this would have had a really big cinema re-release had they been open.
I was going to say, it's a shame that it just missed the cut, didn't it, for its 40th anniversary? I know at Celebration they were probably gearing up to have something 40th anniversary for Empire. That didn't pan out either. Yeah,
so it's kind of like not the forgotten anniversary. To me, ultimately, the big anniversaries are for the first films. So I would imagine, I mean, the 40th anniversary of Empire and Return won't be as big as A New Hope. Yeah. Same when it comes to prequel anniversaries. When the time comes, sequel anniversaries, you always look back at the first one. And I like that they do the additional stuff. Okay, you had all this really cool merch for the first one. Now we're just going to repeat it for the anniversaries for the next one. So it was still nice to do it. And, you know, some of the merch looks great, but they've not probably had the celebration they wish they could have. As in not the event, the actual celebrating this film's release. But especially when this is one that sometimes, which we'll get to later, regarded as the best Star Wars film. So I think now is a good time more than ever to kind of give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to do tonight. So we kind of have not a couple of questions. We haven't really sort of fully planned this, but we want to cover a couple of things. We want to talk about our favorite scenes from the film. We want to talk about the impact this film not just had on Star Wars, but cinema itself, because there's massive repercussions. And then we're going to kind of not debate between us, but we're going to ask ourselves and discuss, you know, is it the best Star Wars film? And is it the best ever sequel made? Because they are also questions that crop up. This is one of the few films that comes in both of those conversations. So we've got something a bit different. Like I said, we're not going to review the film. We're not going to sit here and tell you, you know, oh, did it blow your mind that Darth Vader was a Star Wars? Yeah, exactly. We're past that. So I think we should jump in very quickly. Favorite parts of the film. I'm going to take a lead. I'm going to try and do it chronologically because I love the whole film. We'll discuss that a little bit more later. I have to go to the Battle of Hoth.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good tale, and it's the best part. It's the end of Act 1, and I want people in the comments to comment your favorite parts too. You had this build-up, and again, I'm not going to discuss the build-up because you've all seen it. But to me, watching this as a kid, watching it as an adult, it's the binoculars, it's the AT-ATs,
Mhm.
and to me, they're still top 3 Star Wars, whatever you want to say, vehicles, creations ever made. Just the Hoth stuff is just amazing. It's so different. I'm not saying it's so Star Wars because it is Star Wars now, but I bet in 1980, I know this was weird, because it's basically a mechanized dog. It's not really like what you'd expect it to be. So I've always had this really nice connection to the Battle of Hoth, where it's a nice tail end. You have amazing music. You have great fighting. It's like its own little short story, and then it propels the rest of the film, which obviously goes in its own ways and stuff. But I wanted to start there. I don't know your thoughts on it. And
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to jump to Hoth as well if you didn't mention it the first time, but now this is not me dogging on Episode 4 by any stretch of the imagination. Fantastic film, absolutely earns its right in cinema history and everything like that. But the first thing that I'm immediately hit with in this movie, I mean, I've known this for all the time, but just watching it again yesterday sort of refreshed it, especially during this whole sequence. The change in direction, Irving Kershner, the whole film just moves at a completely, the way the camera moves, the way that certain shots are focused on and everything like that. This is not me hating on George Lucas, but you go back to Episode 4, I get it, the limitations and everything like that. And yes, there are some shots in the Battle of Yavin where you could argue this point, but it is filmed very flat. It's not as dynamic. You get to this movie and you kick off with this as your big battle for Act 1. Absolutely amazing. And seeing it on the big screen, everything they built for it as well, like the hangar, looks amazing. The location shooting, like Jesus Christ. Everything. Absolutely. It's definitely one of my favorite parts of the film. And seeing it on the big screen, God knows what people thought in 1980, because this still, I know it's the special edition and they update the CGI and everything in there and the sound, but this could hold up. This still absolutely holds up with anything coming out today. You have your stop motion AT-AT walkers and everything like that. I love all that stuff, though. It adds a real charm. You know that they were really thinking outside the box of how they could realize all this stuff on the big screen. But I still think it holds up. It looked fantastic. It sounded great. And that's just sort of like your opening scene. So it's a good start.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think when you mentioned Lucas is a good point, because Irving Kershner, I believe he was George Lucas's film teacher or like lecturer when he was at uni. I think it's the Rat Pack, where it's like Lucas, Spielberg, and all those lot. They say they went to the same uni. They didn't, but they all broke through at a similar time and in similar sort of areas and whatnot. But it's the fact that Lucas is very open with his struggles with directing. I think that's fair to say that he obviously had the heart attack in Episode 4. It wasn't going well, not hidden secrets from anybody. And, you know, you make the biggest film in history, and then are you going to do the follow-up? And I think he takes a very, very ballsy decision to not do it. Obviously, he's producing. It's still his story. He's done his draft of Lee Brackett's. I believe this is the first time he brought on, oh my God, I've forgotten his name, who wrote basically everyone since. He wrote 5, 6, 7 solo.
Lawrence Kasdan?
That's the one. I believe this is the first Lawrence Kasdan. You know, Lucas takes what he's not comfortable with, which is writing, and the directing side of it, and he brings in people he trusts. And I think, obviously, not to delve into a George Lucas story too much, but trust is the biggest issue, which likely affects everything that came and happened to Star Wars after. And again, it's the comfortable, okay, he knows where the story is going and he gets the ideas down. They write it well, they work together, but it is there is a big difference. And also the budget goes up. He's got the backing of the crew, the actors, they can see his vision. And I think Hoff just illustrates that perfectly, that how many films can go on location to a country in that weather. I'm not saying just because it's snow, because obviously some films do it, but the practical environment for this is just this guy's idea that he's going to have giant, you know, walkers shooting some shield generators that look like seashells, but we're going to set the first third of the film. And that's expensive as well. And this film, I think, came in over budget like the first one. But to me, Hoth is, people talk about the greatest battles in Star Wars a lot, but I think Hoth is always up there. And also it's the very beginning of The Empire Strikes Back. It's the rebels losing, ultimately destroying Hoth, not to delve off too far and get to like sort of college, university level. Like, you know, Chris, you know what I mean? You have to write an essay.
Yeah, we could do it if we wanted to. We're just not going to.
It's like the Empire Strikes Back. The Hoth is the loss of the film. Like that's the Empire winning. everything after is character based. It's character driven. It's for these individual characters. It's not for the grand scheme of things, I guess we can say. So really, this is the tail point of the film, and it's the opening third. Then you get your character stuff, which is also a big reason of this coming together. You know, the Emperor doesn't care that Darth Vader's frozen Han Solo and Carbonite. The Emperor's probably sat there like, did you find them on Hoth? Like, and that's such a big thing that gets overlooked because we're invested in these characters. And I've waffled on too far, but
no, it's cool. There is a big character moment that I wanted to talk about, and I think there's one character that was introduced with this movie that was still a laugh riot, which we'll get to in a minute. But this is mostly just a scene for spectacle. But the music and big screen environment and everything like that, I've got to go the Asteroid Chase for another one of my favorite moments. It's one of John Williams' best piece of music in general, not just in Star Wars. I absolutely love it. And the effects still look great. This still looks so good. And I think I did see behind the scenes of this movie where they were shooting the asteroids in like the foreground separately, weren't they, on like a blue screen plate? And then I don't know if they had to comp anything else in. I don't really know all the ins and outs of it, but I do know that the effects team absolutely knocked it out of the park in this scene specifically, but the entire movie in general. But this one always gets me. It's this is when I think of Star Wars and like excitement and adventure and everything like that, I always do come back to this scene.
Yeah, it's a good one too because it kind of comes out of nowhere. It's not we're building up to this humongous action set piece of a chase like Episode 4, Pod Race, you know, loads of the Star Wars. They build up to these sequences, but this just kind of happens like, oh, we're into an asteroid field, let's go. And you're right, it's the music that does that scene. It's so well done. It's one of my favorite Williams pieces. It's one of the best Star Wars. I want to say songs is a polite way of saying it. It's not really a theme. I know it's a scene, but
memorable though, isn't it? You can hum it, you can sing it,
and it's like you know this. If you know the music, you know the scene. You can hear it. You can hear the song and know what's happening on screen. And again, it's thinking in 1980 that looks incredible and it holds up. I think that's a really big thing with certain trilogies from the sort of 80s, 90s eras that when they start to hold up in the year 2020. And to be fair to Lucas, I know we've had the special editions and, you know, there are some issues. Empire is obviously the least touched one, I guess we can say.
Yeah.
The least obvious changes. You get a lot of sort of Bespin backgroundy things and voice changes, but you don't get any core story elements added or changed or reduced. And I think that's quite telling in a lot of this. But the credit with when Lucas would do up these films for new releases, he would not just press, I know it's not pressing a button, but essentially he's not just doing, I'm upgrading this to put it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever. I'm looking at all these scenes again and how am I specifically improving that? There are very few filmmakers that have done that with home releases, and he's one of them. And I think that's a really big reason as to why the Star Wars films have aged as well as they have, because he's always took care of them. Obviously, that comes with issues. We're not hiding from that. Some very vocal, some awful decisions, some wonderful ones. But Empire and, you know, these other two films, it's the little subtle things that make all the difference in the world. Because if it gets 10 more years out of it, that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And I was just sort of like noticing more stuff with the structure of this one. And I mean, since now we've had 3 relatively fresh Star Wars movies in our mind now with the sequel trilogy. I'm not using this as a video to dog on the sequel trilogy, but just the way that this moved, I mean, this might be jumping the gun actually, because we're talking about the impact of the movie and everything, but it is the definitive middle chapter. And the tone of this thing was great. And you mentioned like the character development and everything. I think we need to talk about favorite scenes on Dagobah, because Yoda was great. What a gamble though, as a character. And I think they even said, like, you know, Hamill's like, I'm talking to a Muppet. Like, what? That could have gone wrong. So horribly wrong. That could have damned the film. But again, nailed it. Like, well, that was Lucas's idea. He probably stuck to his guns on that one. I don't know how much input he had in terms of how Yoda talks or what his personality would be like, if that was more Kirshner and Frank Oz, or if George Lucas was there and was like, I know exactly what this character needs to be.
I'm going to ask you help for this. Was Dark Crystal before or after Empire?
I think it was after. I think it was 82. Let me just double check.
So,
yeah, 82, Dark Crystal.
So with the Yoda stuff, it's right. It's the Muppet thing. I think with Hamill, I don't know if it's the same for you. When I was a lot younger, not that Luke wasn't the favorite. Like many things, many protagonists are often boring, even when they're not. sometimes you not avoid a protest, but the hero's journey, because it's been done a million times after. This was one of the first films that did it. I'm not going to delve into that side of it too much, but when you grow older, Luke becomes more interesting, and then you realize that the scene that was boring to me is like an 8-year-old kid on Dagobah, where I wanted to go back to the action, I wanted to go back to Bespin. Actually, the stuff on Dagobah is as good because all the others are still great, but it's the introduction of Yoda, and I've said this to you before. I think I've said it to people who are watching at home. I have never been a big fan of Yoda. Not say I dislike him, I do like him, but as a kid, I didn't like everyone saying the words backwards, didn't like the cliches, didn't like his puppet in the Phantom Menace at a young age.
I think everyone agrees with that. But
I hated the duel in episode 2 as a kid as well. Like, for some reason, Yoda never clicked with me, and I still had a really cool Lego at the age of like 8, which I loved of him. And as a grower, I was like, okay, I get Yoda is wise. I know that because that's what they tell us in 5, and I guess that's really down to how significant he is to this film, how that works. Essentially, spawned the insane after. I mean, we've only just come off the back of Baby Yoda. One of the biggest pop culture phenomenons of maybe this century already. The first time in a long time, everywhere you looked, he was there. I hadn't seen that for a long time with Star Wars stuff, maybe since Force Awakens. Before then, Revenge of the Sith, Baby Yoda just took the world by storm, and you don't get that if Yoda doesn't work in episode 5. If Yoda doesn't work in episode 5 doesn't work, because why is he talking to a Muppet? And I think credit to Lucas for pulling that off, Evan Kirshner, everyone involved with any of the Dagobah scenes, because Mark Hamill said on record multiple times that he really struggled filming 5. I know that, not to get into Last Jedi debate, I know he said very similar things to 8, obviously both for very different reasons. But the fact it worked in episode 5 that he was by himself, he wasn't with Carrie, he wasn't with Harrison, he was on set with the Muppet for the majority of his scenes. Obviously, he came off the back of the car crash, which has got the Wampa at the beginning. The fact that it worked, and fast forward to episode 8, I know we've got different opinions on this. The scene with Yoda is one of my favorite scenes in that film. But better than that, the behind-the-scenes reunion of Mark Hamill coming on set with Yoda, with a puppet Yoda and Frank Oz. That's one of my favorite YouTube. Well, it's off the documentary, but that reunion is one of the best things of the sequels. It's that Mark Hamill's swelling up. You can tell that Frank Oz is quite emotional. He's hiding in. That all comes down to Empire Strikes Back. He doesn't have much to do in 6 either. That could be one criticism of 6, that Yoda doesn't do much, but everything you ever needed from him, you get in this film. And as time went by, to me, as age goes by, he got wiser and wiser. And still, of all of this nonsense, my favorite scenes of him are still at the beginning when he's just playing Luke for a fool, laughing, and it's so funny still. But I know I've delved off again. But
no. I mean, and I think it's unavoidable now, especially in hindsight. I was watching, especially the Dagobah scenes, and seeing how optimistic Luke was and everything. I did have episode 8 in the back of my mind, especially the line when he says I'm not afraid, you will be. Then you get to 8 and racked with fear. He's there. Obviously you can delve into that, whatever, but the one thing that I never got in episode 8 though was why Yoda is being crazy and kooky, which was always an act what Yoda did, and then the real Yoda came out, the distinguished Jedi Master, whatever. That was always weird to me, but anyway, that's that. Yeah, but I mean, I said to you yesterday, I was sort of watching it. I was watching it to enjoy it, obviously, but there's more things now in place that you can bring into it and compare it to and analyze it and everything. Hamill's acting, it's fantastic in that second one. Light years better than he was in the first one. I think people like him in the first one because of nostalgia. If you break that down as performance, it is very whiny. It isn't all that great compared to, say, the likes of Harrison Ford. Even back in the first one, Harrison Ford was and did become much more of a leading man than Mark Hamill did. Obviously, Mark Hamill's had a fantastic career, but more so, I'd say, probably in voice acting and things like that. But he nailed it. I wouldn't have known that he struggled on set just from watching the movie. It looked like he absolutely knocked it out of the park, and I think that would be hard for any actor, especially maybe around that time as well, when sort of puppets and animatronics were probably just starting to come more into their own, I would say. But yeah, if I'm going to chuck another favorite scene in as well, probably move forward towards the end of the film, I've got to mention the lightsaber fight right at the end with Vader. Everything with Vader, the whole dynamic. This is the pivotal moment of the film. I don't even need to say the line. But honestly, yesterday, because you know what the line is, everyone sort of like comes out of the womb knowing the ending of this movie, that line, that moment. It wasn't even sort of. I was expecting that moment to be like grandiose and everything, watching it in the big screen, but it really was. It was just kind of the stuff, the lead up to it, the environment, the room, the staging, the lighting. Bespin just looks really cool. That whole carbonite freezing room. One of my favorite shots, the silhouette of Vader at the top of the stairs, igniting the lightsaber, just everything around that looked amazing. It's still one of my favorite lightsaber fights, and that's sort of when we get in a moment talking about the importance of the film. That scene alone is that's where the whole crux of Star Wars hangs on, because before that point you just had Vader being a cool villain. That is the one moment when you watch it as the originals that, you know, that's the linchpin of the whole original trilogy in that one moment.
Yeah, and I think everything on Bespin's great. From the design of the planet, I mean, not even planet, you're on Cloud City. It took me years as a kid to realize that Cloud City wasn't a planet. It was a city on a planet. I don't know if you have the same sort of vibe.
Yeah. They're interchangeable. Bespin, Cloud City, it just depends on what day.
And the carbon freezing chamber, everything. The moment you get to that you know, the introduction of Lando, who has still some great lines. I kind of said to you, I was like, wow, Donald Glover. Honestly, watching that at the time, I was like, wow, okay, Donald Glover really, not his.
That was another thing. Bring Solo into it as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and spit an image of him, sounds like him, everything. Complete model performance off that. Different conversation, but it is just the best. I mean, it's hard not to sit here. We're just going to sit here and keep saying it's so good because it is. And the duel, you spoke about Hamill's performance, which I have to jump to Bespin to as well, because you're right. As a kid, he's not the cool one. Han Solo's the cool one. For our age group, it's Qui-Gon Jinn and Anakin, and then you grow older and realize that Obi-Wan was actually cooler than both of them. And when Vader gives the line, obviously we all know the behind-the-scenes stuff where Lucas and Kirshner knew from the get-go, and they didn't tell Mark Hamill until the moment before filming. And obviously, you saw our quiz. This was also asked, or was it asked in our quiz? I can't remember. But
yeah, it was asked. Yeah, what was the original line? Yeah,
what was the original name? Is Obi-Wan killed your father. So Hamill's reaction off knowing that a couple of minutes before, which is arguably the biggest spoiler in film history, because as you mentioned, everyone knows the ending to Episode 5. You've never seen Star Wars, but you all know that Darth Vader is the dad. There are cards, there are storybooks, there are everything you can ever have about Darth Vader being the father. And even to this day, watching it for a gazillionth time, he knows it's Mark Hamill's reaction to it. He, you know, if this had been Episode 4, he'd have laughed, because they all laughed because they knew it was nonsense. You know, filming was a catastrophe. And here we are in Episode 5, where Mark Hamill gives still. I don't know how he. I mean, I'm no actor, but I don't know how he does some of those facial expressions still to this day. It's such a real emotion, because I can't imagine people doing that. I mean, you can probably like copy it and stuff, but the way he plays with it, Dave Prowse is there like, wow, this was probably a horrible revelation for him. And then obviously he realized like a year later that actually James Earl Jones replaced his lines again. Different conversation. The whole Vader Luke. I want to bring up a comment by Carl. We'll bring up a couple. Luke wasn't ready for the fight, and Vader's toying with him. Absolutely, the Force scene is the best. It's even funny when you know it's his dad, because he's literally just punishing him, like just throwing everything at him from the window. The lightsaber's down. He doesn't care. And then he also mentioned Yoda. Yoda life lesson all his life has its way to the future's horizon, never his mind on where he was, what he was doing. Great Yoda line, but the Vader stuff is the pinnacle. And you have the payoff in Return of the Jedi, which cements the scene before it, not the film before it, because 6 has the payoff to 5. I'm not going to say it adds an extra dynamic, but if 6 hadn't have worked, you know, if Harrison hadn't have come back and it to somehow kill him by frozen carbonite, or if the Luke and Vader stuff didn't work with the redemption, you could look back at 5 and you'd say, "Oh man, they didn't pay this off." And that's the opinion you'd get. You know, 5 is great, but they didn't pay off, and they did. And then that makes 5 look even better. Now, not to delve into it again, very similar. 30 years later, almost 40 years later, 8 and 9, different conversation, but we can even jump back to 20 years ago with 2 and 3. obviously we went at this stage when 2 came out, we loved it, but 3 had a payoff that 2 didn't set up. 2 very different things, but 3 has the payoff the prequel trilogy needed, and it also gives you a bit more heading into the original. So Star Wars is very, not poetry, it rhymes, but essentially, yes, George Lucas has always been right in that sense.
And I think this set the trend for a lot of trilogies as well, in that you have your first movie that gets made. Star Wars, it was just going to be a one-off. I'd take your arguments that George Lucas originally from the beginning had 12 volumes in mind, 12 episodes in mind. I don't care. That first movie was made, self-contained adventure film, you know, like, and it was like in reverence to like the stuff George Lucas used to watch growing up. Made a lot of money. Then when you make your sequels, you probably go into it with a pretense knowing, right, we've got a trilogy on our hands now. Let's get 2 films in the go. And that's why you always have your middle movie and your last movie are more tightly knitted together than perhaps that first movie. Pirates of the Caribbean now is 5 movies, possibly going to get a 6th one. But if you're looking at it as the first 3, you have your first one that's made, and then 2 and 3 are back to back. Back to the Future did exactly the same thing, and that tends to set the trend. And I'd even go so far as to say, I know that with the prequels and everything that he went into that with a trilogy, but Phantom Menace does feel distinctly different, and episodes 2 and 3 feel much more tied together. That could be down to, you know, like the main core cast with Anakin and Obi-Wan, and the story, just visually, it looks more in line with that second one. And but with the sequel trilogy, they, you know, like where 7 ended going into 8, that was the first Star Wars movie that was picked up immediately where the previous one left off. So that was already an entirely different dynamic in that it did almost feel, I know there's a gap between 8 and 9, but did there really need to be? It could have happened like a week after. It feels very, so it automatically feels different in that way. But yeah, episode 9, different video. We'd already have a video. Perfect example of not paying off everything from your previous movie, or actively choosing not to in this case. Whereas you go back to Empire, and then we know where it leads off in Return of the Jedi, and it's amazing. They nailed it.
I was going to say Raimi trilogy. You know, Spider-Man 1 was a humongous juggernaut hit. Spider-Man 2 ends with a certain young Green Goblin finding out his dad was the Green Goblin. It's the modern trend, Star Wars. I'm not saying Star Wars created this, you know, but even Godfather 2 was the first ever sequel with a number as its title. And that's third film wasn't, that was what, 1 and 2, then 15 year gap, then a third one. Yeah. It wasn't the trilogy of that sense. And Empire did create them. We're talking about sort of how Empire's impacted cinema, and that is a big one, that it's the trilogy, you know. Why weren't cinemas doing quadrilogies? Because the Star Wars things. I mean, you know, okay, let's get down to books. You've got Lord of the Rings, which is a narrative; it's a trilogy, and there were many books before there were films and stuff. But to me, Star Wars sort of pushed film into that trilogy. You know, the biggest franchise before Star Wars was James Bond, and that was just, here's a film every year. You know, by the time Star Wars came out, they were onto Moonraker, and I want to say there'd already been, I want to say 11 maybe.
There's a lot
along those lines, yeah, and. You know, it did impact cinema in that way. Obviously, we can talk about every Star Wars film and how the million things George Lucas did for cinema after, but Empire really, I think, did something different, and it's also because it was the villains winning. It's literally in the title, The Empire Strikes Back. They did strike back. They evaporated them. They destroyed them on Hoth, and they did something also different where we knew we're having a second and third parter, but if the third part was, okay, all your heroes are fine, they're not in any danger, they're all good, we're just going to bring them into the third one and find a new story to go off. This was, okay, no, we need to finish off what we set up in 5. We need to bring Han Solo back. And also 1980, people had to wait for 3 years to find out.
I was just going to bring that up, yeah.
Was that his dad? And I can't imagine, certainly in the social media day and age, obviously different environments influence things very differently. I don't think Empire, I mean, there's always mixed rooms at the time. Everyone knows Empire didn't get a very strong reception at the time of release. Critic-wise, I guess we can say. Financially, adjusted for inflation, I think it still would have made like 1.8 billion in today's market or something insane. Like, it was still one of the biggest ever films. It's never going to reach the money the first one did, but the audience reaction was a slightly mixed. But obviously back then, again, we don't have social media, and I think that's not to sit there and say it's bad because we're doing this on the internet. Cinema evolves, and that comes with it. Certainly, I think it's fairer to say that issues people had in 1980 didn't influence the film in 1983 as much as they do in this day and age. again, not to jump to the sequels, it's really had not to. And full credit to George Lucas, when people were going for him in the prequels, he stuck to his boots with pretty much every decision. He had a couple of ones, like, like Jar Jar obviously getting less screen time and stuff like that. But to Lucas's credit, if he had an idea, he stuck through it, and he would take I don't want to say punishment, but he took what would come with it. And obviously that shaped him in different ways and whatnot. But Empire's really a one-off, and I don't think we can get films like that. You think about the biggest cliffhanger post 1980, it's probably Infinity War.
Yeah,
but we knew every actor had signed a 10-picture deal. We knew that everyone that turned to dust, spoiler alert, had like 3 films left on their contracts, and we knew that everyone that was going to be in Endgame were all in their last film in their contract. So it was kind of, yes, it's a beautiful twist. And again, if we, in 1980, people wouldn't have known that Harrison Ford hadn't had a contract for a 3rd film. That wasn't a discussion with films back then, but it is today. And I think Endgame is a good comparison, actually. But again, the social media era we live in is very different with things like that.
Well, I mean, we've kind of seen we weren't alive during the originals, but we know what was available at the time. Is probably snatches of like little articles in magazines, newspapers, whatever. That was probably all you could get. And then we moved to the prequels, and even for us, like obviously sort of like the infancy of the internet and everything, I remember sort of around Revenge of the Sith, you'd have the Star Wars website, and you'd maybe get the trailer that you could see on there. And that was it. Then you had, like, again, magazine covers, like this is the first glimpse of this new alien that's coming out in that. And it was a really like naive, sort of like innocent time for cinema. And now, as you mentioned, like, yeah, even with Star Wars now you've got like a decade slate that's just dropped out there. You know exactly what's coming. And I think it does take out that emotional connection to it. There's no stakes, essentially. You look at the 3-year gap between this one. Could you imagine waiting 3 years, coming up with all of your amazing fan theories and writing your own Star Wars stories of where it was all going to end off? But, imagine if they just came out and said like, oh yeah, right, Empire Strikes Back, 1980, the next one, 1983, all of the cast have signed their contracts and everything. Harrison Ford's coming back. It's just like, oh, well, why should I care then? Not to take away from Infinity War. I thought the ending to Infinity War was perfect, but there is that when you know that everyone and their mother's getting a Disney Plus show in a couple of years' time. But I mean, if we're moving on to sort of like the impact that it had and everything, as you mentioned, like maybe not originally when it came out, but this is the movie. And I think we've probably mentioned this before. When you're talking about the sequel, if it's a good sequel, you always say it's the Empire Strikes Back of whatever. It has become that title. And quite rightly so. I mean, this is absolutely how you do a sequel, in terms of how it's structured. You separate your characters. So many middle parts do this now. You separate your characters, you put them through their most trying point of the entire story, have everyone broken at the end, and then you have your big payoff in your 3rd act, essentially. And it's kind of set the standard for that. Not to say that this is, maybe it was the first movie that did it. I'm not sure. I'm guessing it was with how everyone talks about it, but it's not a new thing in storytelling or anything. That's been, going since the dawn of time, and plays and everything like that with their different acts. But certainly in film and movie making, I would say that this has absolutely set that benchmark when this came out.
And that's the thing. This is what leads us on to a great question. You mentioned other sequels that have come. To me, there is only one other sequel in the history of cinema that is on this level of Empire, which is The Dark Knight. But The Dark Knight was never called the Empire of the Dark Knight trilogy, because it's the name of the trilogy for that. But also, more importantly, The Dark Knight became the benchmark for the last 12 years of comic book films. Endgame comes out, is it as good as The Dark Knight? That's the question. Whenever a comic film, is it as good as The Dark Knight? Is it as good as The Dark Knight? And that's entered its own territory. But to be fair to Nolan, I'm not going to say he copied the Empire vibe. He's been very vocal about his love for Star Wars. There's a brilliant hour-long video of him and Lucas on YouTube doing a Q&A. Have it checked out. It's quite recently uploaded. It's from like 9 years ago. But even that film, I'm not going to say it takes inspiration from Empire, but that was like, because everyone decided to follow the pathway, we're going to break our characters up, do things differently. Dark Knight kind of did that, but then it set its own standards for its own, not just director, but for every film of his since, etc., etc. Different conversation. We're not here to talk about Christopher Nolan. Come back in 3 weeks. Sorry, I had to say that. No, you're absolutely right, and I think I really keep trying to avoid bringing up Last Jedi, but it's actually impossible now, isn't it? It's so much harder than we think. The pressure that had itself by not being the middle chapter of a trilogy, not being the middle chapter of a Star Wars trilogy, but being the middle chapter of the sequel trilogy to the Star Wars films. The pressure is insane, and obviously that's come out. It's had its discourse. That's why I'm not going to discuss that. But again, is this the empire of the trilogy? And we'll get into a discussion on the best Star Wars films very shortly. But for me, The Empire Strikes Back, to jump ahead of what we've got written down, I would say this is the best sequel I've ever. It's hard because I know you talk about Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to bring Lord of the Rings into it too much. I don't count Lord of the Rings as sequels. To me, it's a story.
One big story.
Yeah, like some film. Back to the Future.
Well, that's what Tolkien was like with the book. He wanted to release that as one big volume, but the publisher said it's too big, split it into 3, and that's why since it's become a trilogy. But originally it was intended. So I can absolutely see that comparison with the movies as well, that it's just one big story.
I've told you before, the first ever time I watched Lord of the Rings, I'd never read the books. It got to the end of Fellowship. I was like, oh, there's not long left. They've got to get to Mordor. And then the final shot was like, wait, there's Mordor.
Like, what a shit ending. I just flipped the desk. Like, what was that?
Because I saw them age like 13, and I thought it was like Star Wars, where it's 3 different films that tell a bigger story. But actually, it was one story across 3 films. And, there aren't many sequels like it. There's not many sequels on its level. And I think Empire will forever remain the benchmark, certainly for Star Wars films, but also for sequels as a whole. Again, Dark Knight's a more modern one, and it does tend to just get everything compared to that. And I think between Dark Knight and Empire, they kind of have most. Even when Mad Max Fury Road came out, everyone was like, "Whoa, this is the Empire Strikes Back of Mad Max films." It's like, it's really not. It's just the best Mad Max film. But I would ask you the question, Christopher, because we'll also bring this piece in. There's a humongous difference between what I think is the best Star Wars film and what is my favorite Star Wars film. Me and you have had this discussion multiple times, not specifically, but the context for those at home, that if I was to rank my top 10 Star Wars films, I would have to split it in 2. It would have to be what is the best and what is my favorite. I think there's a massive difference. And some people say, oh, you can't do 2 lists. What you think is your favorite is the best. Not at all. I get more joy out of watching Fast and Furious than films like Schindler's List, because you physically can't take joy out of films like Schindler's List, right? But Schindler's List is a million times better than any Fast and Furious film could ever dream to be. People are so naive to say that you can only put higher what you enjoy. It's not the case. It's just literally looking at it from, as Obi-Wan would say, a different point of view. And I think Star Wars, the only film to me that carries over to the what do I enjoy the most and what is my favorite, is Empire. It's top of both. Now, I would say in terms of quality, Empire is head and shoulders above the next one, which I often shout to you as The Last Jedi. We won't get into a discussion on that today. But it's very close on favorites to Episode 6. And I'm going to kind of segue this into you, because I know you're a bit similar-ish to me.
Yeah.
Favorite, not the best, obviously.
First off, I completely agree with that. Like, best and favorite, they are 2 very different things. And for me, even growing up, when I had this on I think it was the 97 special edition box set, was the original trilogy Star Wars films that I grew up with. I probably watched this one, I'd say, the least. Thankfully, my opinions have changed since then. I'd always be like A New Hope or Return of the Jedi. And then Return of the Jedi did kind of quickly tip the scale. So if I was going to go with my favorite, one that I will throw on any day of the week, I love it, it would be Return of the Jedi. I get everyone's criticisms. I think some criticisms are a little bit harsh on it, but I can see that they're absolutely there. Whether it be, Han Solo, they just kind of don't know what to do with him. Leia doesn't really get to do all that much. She kind of just stands out of a doorway for the entire 3rd act. I get it, but I think what I take away more from that is Luke's side of the story. I love Luke in Return of the Jedi, finally seeing him ignite that green lightsaber, everything like that. The final fight, that moment, the moment I'm talking about at the end, that is Star Wars to me. It was the culmination. It was the ending of the story. It was told. It was done. Story was told in 1983, but here we are. But Empire Strikes Back is the best, without a doubt. Direction-wise, screenwriting, just the way it's shot, everything, what it did for the story, everything like that. It is a perfect movie. I think, if we bring comments up, go to an earlier one. Carl Roberts said Empire is the definition of a perfect movie. It absolutely is. I'd be hard-pressed to think of something that I didn't like in it at all, or that what didn't work in it. I think it was the perfect middle chapter for a movie, did exactly what it had to do, took us to new places, showed us new sights, advanced the characters, and the perils of the characters as well. Every main character in this, they don't come out of it triumphant. It's a very bittersweet ending, and I think that is probably one of the reasons that I always give it to my favorite being Return of the Jedi, because although it is a sequel, it does still feel very quite self-contained. You have just the first bit of, we're going to Jabba to save this guy, and then you have your complete ending. So it does feel like one. This one, as soon as it ends, this isn't a criticism. You go, okay, now I need the next one. You got to finish that bit of the story. But this is without doubt the best one. What it did, it pushed the boundaries, structure of storytelling, everything. But Return of the Jedi is my favorite, I would say.
It's fair because it's hard, and I think the two. I mean, we both said it. We came at the cinema yesterday, and we said, "Really want to watch Return of the Jedi now?" I didn't. Mm-hmm. I ended up playing a lot of PlayStation instead. But again, it's that story that I need to see what follows it, and it's the benchmark that set everything, not just for cinema, but set the benchmark for every Star Wars film to ever have come out since. Mm-hmm. I couldn't imagine, being at this age and going to the cinema to watch Phantom Menace, not the film itself, but the build-up, the expectation. Arguably, to me, prequels are, personally, I think going to a prequel is harder than going to a sequel because you don't really know what to expect from a sequel. It could be to anything, sequel trilogy, sequel film, anything. You just know it's a continuation of. Mm-hmm. But when it's a prequel, you have these characters that you've seen on screen for X amount of years, months, anything. And you've defined, and even if you haven't intentionally thought of it, you kind of think, I wonder how they became that, or, let's take something recent like Rogue One. I would love to see how Krennic rose through the ranks, like me and you both would, and, they could do a Krennic Disney Plus TV series, and then would set, because we've had our own, even unintentional visions of how did this become this, and it doesn't come out that way. That's where the prequel things come into it. And I get the prequel's criticisms. I'm happy that certainly over the last, I want to say 5 years, that the prequels, the people have calmed down on them. I think a lot of them, I'm not getting to an age, but take Ewan McGregor as the example. We did an interview like 3 years ago saying that, I went from people giving me abuse in the streets to the kids that grew up with it telling me how important this was their childhood, and it was kind of a really polite, now I see George's vision and I was in the wrong. Mm-hmm. And it means that sometimes time is an advantage, and I think the prequels have that we are of the prequel generation. We don't hide from it and stuff like that, and obviously they do have their issues, but at the core of it, as George Lucas said, it's a kid's story, and it can't be a kid's story. Empire's not a kid's story. Empire's the most adult of the...
I'd say a family story.
Yeah. And there's going to be scenes that are hard, but kids can still enjoy this. Mm-hmm. They still get to see the stormtroopers. They get the snow speeders. They get a Boba Fett, who's apparently really cool, who I still never been big on.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
I can't. Was that like a long-term thing where he became like a fan favorite, or was it like straight after this movie? Because he really doesn't do much in this movie. Watching it again,
they say it was straight away. They always say it was straight away. I'm not going to say I was there and witnessed all these people, but as someone that watches a lot of sport, I'm used to people telling me that they remember matches when they really don't, and how these matches they remember 30 years on from when they definitely don't. Boba Fett to me is in that category that there was an inkling point when he was cool. I think Admiral Akbar's a famous one where I think it's kind of that, I don't know how to describe it, but Admiral Akbar, apparently It's a Trap didn't really become a big thing until the special editions came out. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was the sin of Boba Fett, where it became cool with the special editions because it was cool and people like him more because he's the cool one. They take a niche that because he's the cool one, they have to like him for being the cool one. I'm not going to sit here criticize anyone that genuinely loves that character. That's absolutely fine. You're entitled to. I'm entitled to my opinion. The reason he's cooler than what he is because how he dies in 6.
Mhm.
It's the over-the-top, exaggerated, ridiculous ending that Star Wars characters need and deserve. Completely different film, but yeah, I don't know. I don't see enough of him off 5 to be cool. I'm sorry, I never have done ever as a kid. Lando was cool. He had a cape. He would say stuff to Han Solo. Darth Vader was cool. He had his own theme tune. I used to like Admiral Piet when I was younger, and I still do. And it's these little minor Star Wars things. And Boba Fett, I've never really got it. But then again, people have all the bounty hunters, don't they?
Yeah, I think I don't know. We don't really get to see Boba Fett do anything cool, and when we have the opportunity to see him do something cool in the next movie, it's just.
Is it all the expanded universe? Is it the old EU?
I think it probably is. Yeah.
Is there a fine line between people that say that deleting the EU ruined their lives, and are the Boba Fett fans like in that side? You get like a graph, and it's like, here's the Boba Fett fans, how much they like them. Here's how angry they were at the EU, not the EU, not the European Union, but obviously the expanded universe. And there's this like big line that points up. Completely off point, but
we'll see what happens with Mandalorian season 2. If we are going to get Boba Fett in there or not, if it's going to be someone else. But we have heard the rumors that maybe he's coming back, and we'll have to see. Maybe you'll have a change of heart. Maybe we both will have a change of heart when we see him go toe to toe with Mando, if that's going to happen. But that's all speculation. The last thing I'll say, don't want to dog on Last Jedi, and actually that could potentially be a good future video for us if you want a Last Jedi debate. I think that could be really interesting. All good friends, no harm meant or anything like that.
I think everyone's reached a point where no one cares if people say they like or dislike stuff.
Yeah.
I think 3 years ago it was heated. 2 years ago it was heated. I think now it's all said and done. Like, it's just done.
There's hundreds of video essays out there on YouTube you can go and watch. But
for
the
both
last thing
the argument too. Sorry.
Yeah, where I'd say that Empire succeeds in being a middle chapter and Last Jedi doesn't. There's a lot of reasons for me, but let's go with the ending. When you get to the end of Empire Strikes Back, you know that Lando's going to go to Jabba and they're going to try and save Han. You've had Luke, who's just fought Vader, epically lost to him, the massive revelation that is his father. You know that he's going to have to face him again at some point. You had the little scene with the Emperor in there, knowing that he's there in the background and that he's probably going to filter it into something. You've got threads. You've got all of these things that right, I can expect to see all these in the next one. When I got to The Last Jedi, the end of The Last Jedi, it felt the characters didn't really feel like they were in any kind of different place than they were at the end of Episode 7. They were in exactly the same situation. There was no threads or lead-ins that we even said for like Episode 9, we don't know what's going to happen in Episode 9 because it turns out they didn't know. There was no sort of through line or anything like that. Now, we could speculate if Rian Johnson had have come back, would he have had a plan? Would he have been able to have make it work with the very divisive middle chapter? But it's fine because he's got his plan for the final act. We'll never see that because it didn't happen. That's in a parallel universe somewhere. But I just think when you get to 8, there's, Snoke's gone. Kylo Ren's still bad. Luke's gone, but does it really matter because Rey's there? There's nothing that makes you go, oh, I'm excited for 9. Like, where's this going to go? Because it just sort of ends. And I think that's where I draw the line at. I think that Empire does have those threads, almost like that cliffhanger kind of ending where you can, yeah, exactly. That's
with 8, because I really want to do a video now, not now, but I think we could and should. We're in a civil state. Listening to that is bang on. The ending of 8 to me is more like the ending of episodes, not 7, but 4. It's the episode 7 ended with, okay, Luke is with Rey. We need to find out what's happening with the lightsaber.
That was your cliffhanger. Yeah, literal cliffhanger. Yeah,
I love 7. Again, different opinions. I think I'm a bit more respected. I knew it was the soft one because they needed to cater for X amount of people. Anyway, the way episode 8 ends for me was, okay, Snoke is dead. Kylo Ren is now the big bad of this. You've set Kylo Ren up. He's rejected Rey. She's tried to bait him. You've now got this two lead where it's Rey versus Ren. Reylo, yes, fair enough. You can all have that. And you've got the First Order on top of the world with these scattered leftovers of the Resistance, aka Rebellion. And it was like, okay, there aren't any threads for them to follow. the way I always looked at the ending of 8 and my initial excitement for 9 was the big bad Kylo is going to have to go against Rey, but those two like each other, so it's going to create a dynamic. And I was far invested. I love the politics of the prequels. And obviously, ultimately, the First Order are kind of in control of the world, but you don't really care. It's not important.
We don't see it, do we? So,
It's not important to this trilogy. To me, the core of this trilogy is Rey and Ren. And it was more like, okay, how is that going to work? What is next? And you're absolutely right. In somewhere in a parallel universe, there is a Rian Johnson episode 9. And unfortunately, we definitely didn't get that. Instead, they went back to JJ, and I will still say at the time when Colin Trevorrow got sacked, which was mid-2017, Last Jedi was 6 months off being released. All the rumors pointed to Ryan, and they gave it to JJ because Ryan was getting the spin-off trilogy. I still think we're getting that 1 year. He's definitely enjoying Knives Out, which is why we're getting Knives Out 2. Then I think that's going to go into production. But bringing in JJ, who did 7, absolutely the right idea for 9, because we were all told at the time, again, not to, I know we've took this off Empire now, but because it was the guy that set up 7, created the characters in 7, Rian Johnson left some characters unused from 8, aka Knights of Ren, because he said, these weren't my creations, I'm going to let someone else do with them what they want to. The way that the universe was left in 8 was just a lot simpler, and it was just about coming up with a story for 9. I think, not that we read into leaked scripts, but we kind of did. Trevorrow had the right path. It needed a lot of correcting, but the initial, certainly the Galaxy-esque stuff was there.
Mm-hmm.
The Rey and Ren stuff wasn't. And then JJ did the Rey and Ren stuff okay in 9, but not the rest of it. It's like somewhere there was
a merge, didn't it? It needed
And I get why, you don't have to use, and obviously, Fate, we heard from day one that Carrie was going to be the main plot point to 9, because Luke in 8, Han in 7, Karen, obviously what happened, no one ever saw that coming. And obviously, I think Trevorrow, that's one of the big reasons why he struggled with his rewrites, because he couldn't case that in. Absolutely couldn't completely understand that. But the 5 and 8, I think because 5 is compared to 8, and that's what I mentioned earlier, 8's compared to 5, because it was the middle point of the sequel Star Wars trilogy, it had that certain specific expectation, I think is a fair way of saying it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it did, if Snoke had lived, then it would have been, okay, here's Return of the Jedi in the sequel trilogy. And I know he kind of does, the Snoke, killing Snoke, the middle finger, etc. I still think the way 8 left it open was just a much simpler premise for Resistance versus First Order, Rey versus Ren. And I think that would have been more interesting, but unfortunately, they tried to do too much, and they had time on their side. They didn't need the 2019 release date. If they really wanted to, they could have took an extra year out and said, okay, but instead they had to go 100 miles an hour. And I get that. I get there's deadlines. They want it every 2 years, and different conversation. But certainly before 8, the comparisons to 5 were there, and I still see bits of some iconography of each. But I think 8, the ending of 8 is more akin to the ending of like the Phantom Menace. When there's the shot of them all in the X-wing, and hi, I'm Poe. Still hate it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, here's the happy ending, but they've took this big defeat. But here's them all joining up together for this moment, because they had their individual moments that collaborated into the ending. But oh god, it's really hard. I didn't think about talking about 8 during Empire Strikes Back.
But I think the comparison's there now. I think obviously because Star Wars is ever changing, we keep getting more movies. You can sort of analyze them and look at them in different way, compare them. I think it's very valid as a middle chapter. It's very valid to offer comparisons of what things work, which things don't work. But I think we're coming up to an hour now, so I think we should probably round it off on an hour. But we definitely need a sequel trilogy talk at some point, or just a Last Jedi debate, whatever it's going to be. I think that absolutely has to be a future video at some point.
Just one quick comment from Carl. We didn't get the big 3. I'm still with you on that. I still think there was a way it could have been done. I'm not going to sit here and say how I would have done it, but to me, absolutely.
And, not to bring it on a downer, back to Empire, but
my final farewell is that this is my favorite film. Everyone says, what's your favorite film of all time? They say Star Wars, and I say, there's 11 of them. I pretend there's 10 of them. But I am at this point where I always put this as my favorite and the best, because I think as I've reached a different age, I get I love my prequels. I'm happy to switch my brain off like Fast 9, but it gets to a point with me with Star Wars where like 5 and 6 are a balance. But this is to me the best Star Wars one, the best sequel, and my favorite film of all time. For all the reasons that as you develop older, the film develops with you. Becomes more wise, it becomes more real, and it leaves you wanting so much more, and you get all that and more. So, bit of an off tangle, but there's nothing more I can add to what's already been said about The Empire Strikes Back over 40 years plus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you completely. It was great having that sense of nostalgia watching it again. You know everything that's coming, but from the 20th Century Fox intro to the opening logo and everything like that, even though you know exactly what's coming, it's a movie that you've seen tens of times, loads of times. There were still new bits that we discovered and everything, and we still had a big laugh with it. And I think that kind of reminded me what Star Wars was, and that feeling that did escape me for a little while. I did mention that on camera that I just wanted Star Wars to go away. And whilst I might still feel like that in some respects, I always want these movies to still be there. It's the best Star Wars movie. Not my favorite, as we discussed, it's the best. And it was an absolute blast. And what a movie to get back to the cinema and see. I mean, I don't know what the other films are going to be like, but we are going to be talking about that at some point. I want to say this Thursday, we will be talking about our most anticipated movies of 2020 when we finally get them in cinemas now. We were getting film trailers that we'd already seen too many times back in February, and we're still getting them. But we will have a video on that this Thursday. That'd be good to talk about. And wouldn't it be ironic if by the end of 2020, if those films aren't up to much, Empire Strikes Back is the best film that we saw in 2020, 40 years on?
I'm excited. I mean, if they do delay more films, then please put Return of the Jedi out there for us to finish off our duo. So again, different conversation. Disney, if you're listening, thank you. They switched off at the last bit, didn't they?
Get it done. But so thank you to Carl Roberts for commenting throughout the stream, for watching it. As we said, we didn't want this to be too much of a review. We just wanted this to be a discussion, and it was always great talking about this movie. Please do follow us on all the socials at the bottom. Comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We've got so much content coming out for the rest of this month, and especially next month. If you're a film fan, if you're a fan of Nolan, that is absolutely an unmissable one. So please follow everything there. And we will be back later on in the week. We will be updating socials on the regular. So do all that good stuff. And until next time.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Sorry. Carl Roberts, what was the new line you heard? We're gonna end this on a brilliant line. The line was, "It's metal," and we will let you know on Thursday if you can find out when that said. It's metal. It made us laugh more than it needed to. And we're going to end it on one of the greatest revelations of seeing Empire in its 40th anniversary. Thank everyone for listening.